A shadowy figure slips through the velvet curtains of the Grand Opera House, a glint of steel in hand as the soprano's final note hangs in the air, cut short by a scream that echoes through the night. Welcome to Poirot and the Murder Behind the Opera Curtains, a tale of intrigue and deception that will keep you guessing until the final bow. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and immerse yourself in this suspenseful story. If you're enjoying the twists and turns, hit that subscribe button because your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The overture of suspicion in the glittering heart of 1920s Paris, where the lights of the Opera Garnier dazzled like 1,000 diamonds. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable moustache and stepped into a world of melody and mystery. The evening's performance of Carmen had drawn the city's elite, their silks and jewels whispering secrets as they filled the opulent seats. Poirot, invited by his old friend Inspector Giraud, who had a knack for dragging the Belgian detective into French affairs, settled into a box seat with a faint smile. Little did he know, this night would unravel a web of betrayal hidden behind the stage's grandeur. As the orchestra tuned their instruments, a hush fell over the audience. But beneath the harmony lurked a discord that would soon erupt into murder. Our story begins with the prima donna, Madame Elise Duval, a woman whose voice could shatter glass and hearts alike. Elise was no ordinary singer. She had risen from the streets of Montmartre to become the toast of Europe, her performances selling out months in advance. But fame, as Poirot often mused, came with enemies sharper than any critic's pen. That night, as the curtain rose on the passionate tale of love and jealousy, Elise took the stage in a gown of crimson silk, her eyes sparkling with the fire of her character. The audience was captivated, hanging on every trill and crescendo, yet in the wings tension simmered. The conductor, Monsieur Henri Laurent, a man with a temper as volatile as his baton swings, had argued with Elise just hours before over a tempo change that she insisted upon. "You think you own this opera?" he had hissed, his face flushed. Witnesses among the chorus whispered of his threats, but in the heat of rehearsal, such words were commonplace, or so they seemed. Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, noticed the subtle undercurrents even from his vantage point. He watched as the theatre manager, Victor Beaumont, paced nervously in the lobby during intermission, his brow furrowed over financial woes. The opera house was on the brink of ruin, rumours said, and Elise's star power was the only thing keeping creditors at bay. Beaumont had invested heavily in this production, borrowing from shady lenders who didn't take kindly to delays. Adding to the mix was Elise's lover, the dashing baritone Raoul de Vere, whose jealousy over her adoring fans was no secret. Raoul had been seen lurking near her dressing room, his possessive gaze following her every move. And then there was the understudy, young Sophie Moreau, ambitious and talented, who dreamed of stepping into Elise's spotlight. Sophie had confided to a stagehand that one day, "The role will be mine," her words laced with a hunger that bordered on desperation. As the second act unfolded, the drama on stage mirrored the brewing storm backstage. Carmen's defiant aria filled the hall, but suddenly a muffled thud echoed from behind the curtains, dismissed by most as a prop mishap. Poirot's little grey cells, however, prickled with alertness. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the performers. Elise finished her scene flawlessly, but as she exited stage left, her face paled slightly, or so it seemed in the dim lights. The interval arrived, and the audience buzzed with applause, unaware that in the shadows, a crime was about to be discovered. It was Giraud who burst into Poirot's box, his face ashen. "Mon ami, come quickly! Madame Duval, she is dead!" Rushing backstage, Poirot found chaos reigning supreme. Elise lay slumped in her dressing room, a jewelled dagger protruding from her chest, her crimson gown now stained with real blood. The room was a whirlwind of powders, costumes, and half-eaten chocolates, her one indulgence before performances. No forced entry, the door locked from inside. yet the window overlooked a sheer drop to the Seine below. Giraud barked orders at the arriving police, sealing the theatre and rounding up suspects. Poison? Stabbed? We must interrogate everyone, he declared, but Poirot held up a hand, his voice calm. Non, Inspecteur. Let us observe first. The method is clear. The dagger from the prop room, but the motive. That is the symphony we must conduct. Examining the scene, Poirot noted peculiar details. A half-burned letter in the ashtray, its remnants hinting at blackmail. Pay, or your secret. And a faint scent of cigar smoke, unusual for Elise who abhorred tobacco. Footprints in the spilled face powder suggested a man's shoe, size 10, but the theatre was full of such. He questioned the suspects one by one. Henri Laurent claimed he was in the orchestra pit the whole time, baton in hand, but a violinist recalled him slipping away briefly. Victor Beaumont admitted to visiting Elise about funding, but swore he left her alive. Raoul de Vere, tears in his eyes, professed undying love, yet his alibi was shaky. A quick smoke in the alley, he said. Sophie Moreau, wide-eyed, insisted she was practicing in a side room, but her gloves bore a suspicious red smudge. Poirot pondered these threads as the police carted away evidence. The murder weapon is theatrical, mes amis, but the killer is no actor. They have left clues in their haste. He traced the dagger to the prop master, who confirmed it was missing since rehearsal. A practical tip for any budding detective: always check the alibis against the timeline. Here, the thud during the aria placed the crime mid-performance, narrowing the window to mere minutes. As the chapter of initial suspicion closes, Poirot gathers the cast in the green room, his eyes twinkling. Someone among you has composed a deadly finale, but fear not. The truth will emerge in the acts to come. With the stage set for deeper revelations, we move to the shadows of hidden alliances in the next chapter. Chapter 2. Shadows of Hidden Alliances. The air in the opera. Garnier's green room hung heavy with suspicion as Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled cast and crew, his piercing gaze sweeping over each face like a spotlight. The police had cordoned off the crime scene, and the once vibrant theatre now felt like a gilded cage. Poirot, with his hands clasped behind his back, paced slowly, the faint creak of his polished shoes the only sound breaking the tense silence. The suspects, Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere, and Sophie Moreau, sat rigidly, their eyes darting between one another, each guarding secrets as carefully as they guarded their expressions. Outside, the Parisian night buzzed with gossip, but within these walls, a different kind of drama was unfolding, one where alliances forged in whispers could unravel the truth or bury it deeper. Poirot began with a question that cut through the room like a stage cue. Who among you knew of Madame Duval's private affairs? His voice was soft but commanding, and the group shifted uncomfortably. Henri, the conductor, adjusted his cufflinks, his lips tightening. He insisted he cared only for the music, not Elise's personal life. Yet Poirot noticed his fingers tremble slightly, a telltale sign of unease. The detective's mind flickered to the burned letter found in Elise's dressing room, its cryptic words about a secret. Could Henri have known something compromising? Perhaps a professional rivalry had turned personal, or worse, financial. The opera house's ledgers, Poirot had learned from a discreet chat with a stagehand, showed irregularities. Money siphoned to an unknown account, possibly tied to Henri's lavish lifestyle. Victor Beaumont, the theatre manager, was next to draw Poirot's scrutiny. His polished demeanour cracked as he dabbed sweat from his brow, claiming ignorance of Elise's secrets beyond her contract. Yet, Poirot had overheard a usher mention Victor's late-night meetings with a mysterious figure in a black coat, always near the opera's loading dock. These rendezvous, whispered about among the crew, hinted at dealings with the city's underworld, lenders who had propped up the failing theatre. Had Elise discovered Victor's shady transactions? Her insistence on higher pay might have threatened to expose his schemes, making her a liability he couldn't afford. Raoul Devers, the baritone and Elisa's lover, sat with his head bowed, his hands clenched. When pressed, he admitted to knowing Elise had received threatening letters over the past month, but he swore they were from obsessive fans. Nothing more. Poirot, however, noted Raoul's hesitation, the way his eyes flicked towards Sophie before answering. Was it guilt or fear? The detective recalled a stagehand's gossip. Raoul and Sophie had been seen arguing in hushed tones near the costume racks days ago. Their words inaudible, but their gestures heated. Could Raoul have allied with the ambitious understudy to secure his place by Elisa's side, or to remove her entirely? Sophie Moreau, the young understudy, met Poirot's gaze with a defiant tilt of her chin, her voice steady as she claimed ignorance of any secrets. Yet, her poised exterior faltered when Poirot mentioned the red smudge on her gloves. "Lipstick," she said quickly, "from adjusting my costume." But Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. Lipstick or blood? Sophie's ambition was no secret. She had trained under Elise for years, always in her shadow. A prop master confided that Sophie had lingered near the dagger's storage rack earlier that day, asking about its authenticity for research. Was she plotting her ascent to stardom, or had she stumbled into someone else's scheme? As Poirot pieced together these threads, a new clue emerged from a nervous chorus girl who approached him in the corridor. She whispered of overhearing a conversation 2 nights prior, behind the prop room where 2 voices, one male, one female, discussed silencing Elise before she talks. The girl couldn't identify them, but the mention of a payment chilled her. Poirot's mind raced. An alliance, perhaps, between 2 of the suspects, bound by mutual gain or mutual fear. He returned to the green room, where the group now eyed each other with open distrust. "Mes amis," he said, his tone almost playful. "The truth hides not in solitude, but in partnerships. Someone here has made a pact, and I will find it." The detective's investigation led him to the opera's labyrinthine basement, where old set pieces and forgotten costumes gathered dust. There, among the shadows, he found a torn ticket stub from a rival theatre dated the previous week, and a cigarette butt bearing the same brand as the cigar scent in Elise's dressing room. These clues pointed to an outsider's involvement, or a deliberate attempt to mislead. As Poirot pocketed the evidence, a creak echoed from the darkness, and he spun to find nothing but an empty passageway. Someone was watching, guarding their secret with vigilance. With the stakes rising, Poirot knew the next act would demand confronting these hidden alliances head-on, peeling back layers of deceit to reveal who stood to gain from Elisa's final curtain call. The stage is set for the unravelling of motives in the shadows, where the truth waits to take centre stage. Chapter 3. The Motives. Unravelled. The dim glow of gas lamps flickered along the backstage corridors of the Opera Garnier, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with the secrets of the night. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the prop room, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of a dusty wooden crate, his mind a whirlwind of connections. The air smelled of old paint and moth-eaten velvet, a stark contrast to the glittering facade of the auditorium above. The murder of Madame Elise Duval had shaken the theatre's foundations, and now, with the suspects' alibis fraying like worn costumes, Poirot sensed the truth was close, yet maddeningly obscured by layers of deceit. The ticket stub and cigarette butt he'd found in the basement gnawed at his thoughts, hinting at a world beyond the opera house's gilded walls. Tonight, he would unravel the motives driving this deadly performance, peeling back the masks each suspect wore with such care. Poirot began his evening by summoning the suspects individually to the theatre's rehearsal room, a cavernous space lined with mirrors that reflected their unease back at them. First was Henri Laurent, the conductor, whose haughty demeanour had softened into a nervous fidgeting. Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze, his voice low and deliberate. "Monsieur Laurent, you claim to have been in the orchestra pit during the fatal moment, yet a violinist saw you slip away. Where did you go?" Henri's eyes widened, his hands smoothing his slicked-back hair. He stammered that he'd gone to fetch a spare baton from his office, a flimsy excuse Poirot dismissed with a raised eyebrow. Digging deeper, the detective revealed what he'd learned from the theatre's accountant. Henri had been skimming funds from the orchestra's budget, funneling them into a private account. "Did Madame Duval discover your theft?" Poirot pressed. "Did she threaten to expose you, forcing your hand?" Henri's face flushed crimson, but he denied any involvement, insisting Elise knew nothing of his finances. Yet the tremor in his voice betrayed a man teetering on the edge of exposure. Next came Victor Beaumont, the theatre manager, whose polished charm had eroded into a haggard exhaustion. Poirot confronted him with the whispers of his dealings with shadowy lenders, men who prowled Paris's underworld. "Monsieur Beaumont, your opera house teeters on ruin, and Madame Duval's demands for higher pay strained your coffers further. Did you silence her to appease your creditors?" Victor's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. Curiously, the same brand as the butt found in the basement. He admitted to borrowing from unsavory sources, but swore Elise's death was not his doing. "She was our salvation, not a threat," he protested. Poirot, however, noted a discrepancy. A ledger entry showed a large payment to an unknown recipient the day before the murder, marked only as urgent. Victor claimed it was for set repairs, but his evasive glance suggested a darker purpose, perhaps a bribe to keep Elise quiet about his dealings. Raoul de Vere, the baritone, entered the room with the air of a man carrying a storm within him. His broad shoulders slumped as Poirot questioned him about the threatening letters Elise had received. "You knew of these, Monsieur de Vere, yet you did not report them. Why?" Raoul's jaw tightened, his dark eyes flashing with a mix of grief and defiance. He confessed that Elise had confided in him about a letter demanding money in exchange for silence about a past scandal, a liaison from her early days in Montmartre long before her fame. Raoul claimed he urged her to pay, fearing for her reputation, but she refused, calling the blackmailer a coward. Poirot's mind latched onto this. The burned letter in Elise's dressing room, with its hint of pay or your secret, aligned with Raoul's story. But was Raoul protecting her or himself? A stagehand had seen him arguing with Elise hours before the performance, his voice raised about betrayal. Poirot wondered if Raoul's jealousy, fueled by Elise's refusal to heed his advice, had driven him to a desperate act. Sophie Moreau, the understudy, was the last to face Poirot's scrutiny. Her youthful beauty masked a steely ambition, and she met his questions with a calculated calm. "Mademoiselle Moreau, your gloves bore a red smudge. Blood, perhaps, rather than lipstick." Sophie's lips parted in a gasp, but she quickly recovered, insisting it was indeed makeup from a rushed costume change. Poirot shifted tactics, mentioning her presence near the prop room's dagger rack. "You asked about the dagger's authenticity, did you not? Were you planning to use it for more than research?" Sophie's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her innocence, claiming she only wanted to understand the role of Carmen fully. Yet Poirot had learned from a chorus member that Sophie had been seen slipping a note under Henri's office door days earlier, its contents unknown. Was she conspiring with the conductor, perhaps to secure her place as the new star? Her motive seemed clear. Elise's death would thrust her into the spotlight, but her composed demeanor made Poirot question if she was a pawn in a larger game. As the interrogations ended, Poirot retreated to the auditorium, now empty save for the echoes of the night's tragedy. He sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on the crimson curtain that had framed Elise's final performance. The clues swirled in his mind. Henri's financial deceit, Victor's underworld ties, Raoul's jealous passion, and Sophie's burning ambition. The ticket stub from a rival theatre suggested an external player, perhaps a competitor envious of Elise's draw. The cigarette butt, matching Victor's brand, hinted at his presence in places he denied being, and the blackmail letter pointed to a secret Elise had guarded fiercely. perhaps the key to her murder. Poirot's fingers tapped his temple as he considered a new possibility. What if the killer wasn't acting alone? The chorus girl's tale of overheard whispers, silencing Elise before she talks, suggested a conspiracy, a motive shared by two or more players. A sudden noise from the balcony snapped Poirot from his thoughts, a faint rustle like fabric brushing stone. He rose, his cane tapping softly as he climbed the stairs, only to find a single opera glove dropped carelessly on a seat. It was embroidered with the initials SM, Sophie Moreau. Had she been eavesdropping, or was this another misdirection? Poirot tucked the glove into his pocket, his resolve hardening. The motives were clearer now, but the truth remained elusive, hidden behind a final veil of lies. As the night deepened, Poirot knew the next act would require a bolder approach, confronting the suspects together to watch their facades crack under pressure. The stage was set for a dramatic revelation, where the killer's mask would finally fall. Chapter 4. The masquerade of truth, the grand chandelier of the Opera Garnier loomed overhead, its crystals catching the faint moonlight that filtered through the theatre's high windows, casting a mosaic of light and shadow across the empty stage. Hercule Poirot stood center stage, his silhouette sharp against the crimson backdrop, as he prepared to confront the suspects together in a bold move to shake loose the truth. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the distant creak of the old building settling into the night. The embroidered glove with Sophie's initials found in the balcony weighed heavily in Poirot's pocket, a clue or a plant, he wasn't yet sure. Tonight he would orchestrate a performance of his own, using the suspects' tensions against them to reveal the killer hiding behind their carefully crafted masks. Poirot had arranged for Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere and Sophie Moreau to gather in the auditorium, seated in a semicircle under the harsh glow of a single spotlight. Inspector Giraud, standing by the wings, watched with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, his notepad ready. Poirot began with a theatrical flourish, his voice resonating through the hall. Mes amis, a crime has been committed under this very roof, and one of you, or perhaps more, holds the key to its unravelling. Let us peel away the lies, shall we? The suspects shifted uneasily, their glances darting like moths caught in the light. Poirot's strategy was simple: provoke reactions, watch for cracks, and let the guilty betray themselves. He started with Henri, the conductor, whose financial misdeeds had already surfaced. Monsieur Laurent, your theft from the orchestra's funds suggests a desperate man. Did Madame Duval threaten to expose you, forcing you to act? Henri's face twisted in indignation, but before he could protest, Poirot produced the cigarette butt from the basement, its brand matching the one Henri smoked. And this, found near a ticket stub from a rival theatre. Were you meeting someone to plot against Elise? Henri stammered, claiming he often smoked in the basement to clear his head. But his eyes flicked toward Victor, a fleeting look that Poirot noted with interest. Turning to Victor Beaumont, Poirot's tone grew sharper. Monsieur, your dealings with dangerous lenders are no secret. A payment marked urgent in your ledger. Was it to silence Elise, who perhaps knew too much about your debts? Victor's cigarette trembled in his hand as he denied any such payment, insisting it was for routine repairs. But Poirot pressed further, revealing a new discovery. A stagehand had seen Victor slip a small envelope under Elise's dressing room door the night before the murder. Was it a warning or a bribe? Poirot asked. Victor's composure faltered, his voice rising as he claimed it was merely a contract amendment. The room grew tenser, and Sophie's fingers tightened on her chair, her eyes fixed on Victor. Raoul de Vere was next, his brooding presence a storm cloud in the circle. Poirot held up the burned letter's remnants, its words of blackmail now a focal point. Monsieur de Vere, you knew of Elise's past scandal, yet you did nothing to protect her from these threats. Why? Raoul's voice cracked as he spoke of his love for Elise, admitting he'd begged her to pay the blackmailer to avoid ruin. But Poirot's sharp gaze caught a lie. Raoul's claim of being in the alley during the murder's timeline didn't align with a doorman's account, who saw him re-enter the theatre just after the fatal thud. "Were you in her dressing room, monsieur, driven by jealousy or betrayal?" Raoul's fists clenched, but he remained silent, his gaze dropping to the floor. Sophie Moreau, the understudy, faced Poirot's scrutiny with a defiant tilt of her head. He produced the embroidered glove, holding it aloft like a prop in a play. "Mademoiselle, this was found in the balcony, far from where you claim to be practicing. Were you watching, plotting, or perhaps covering your tracks?" Sophie's cheeks flushed, but she insisted the glove must have been stolen from her dressing room, a weak defense that drew a skeptical hum from Poirot. He then revealed a chorus member's testimony. Sophie had been seen whispering with Henri in the prop room days before, their conversation ending abruptly when noticed. Was this a pact to remove Elise, to secure your place as the star? Sophie's eyes blazed, but she denied any conspiracy, her voice steady yet strained. As the confrontation unfolded, Poirot orchestrated a deliberate pause, letting the silence press down on the group. Then, a new clue emerged from Giraud, who had searched the suspect's belongings. In Henry's office, tucked inside a scorebook, was a receipt for a jeweller's shop, dated the day of the murder, for a custom dagger sheath, matching the murder weapon's design. Henri paled, claiming it was a gift for a colleague, but the coincidence was damning. Meanwhile, a search of Victor's desk revealed a coded telegram, sent to an unknown recipient, mentioning, "The problem is handled." Raoul's locker held a photograph of Elise, torn at the edges, with a single word scrawled on the back: "Liar." Sophie's purse contained a vial of red liquid, not blood, but stage makeup, though its presence raised questions about her earlier claim. The suspects began to unravel, their accusations flying like arrows. Henri pointed at Victor, shouting that his debts made him desperate. Victor snapped back, accusing Raoul of letting jealousy cloud his reason. Raoul glared at Sophie, muttering about her ambition, while Sophie retorted that they were all too quick to judge her dreams. Poirot watched, his little grey cells humming as the group's unity cracked. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The truth, mes amis, is not in your words but in your actions. One of you, or perhaps two, wove this deadly plot, and the stage will reveal all." As the session ended, Poirot lingered on the stage, his eyes scanning the now empty seats. The clues were mounting: the receipt, the telegram, the torn photo, the vial. Each pointed to a motive, but the connections remained elusive. Had Henry crafted a sheath to hide the dagger's theft? Was Victor's telegram a signal to his lenders? Did Raoul's torn photo betray a lover's rage? Or was Sophie's vial a sign of a staged deception? A faint sound, a dropped prop in the wings, made Poirot turn, but the shadows revealed nothing. The killer was close, their mask slipping, and Poirot knew the next act would demand a deeper dive into the theatre's hidden corners, where the final pieces of this deadly puzzle awaited. Chapter 5. The Echoes of the Past. The Opera. Garnier's backstage was a maze of narrow passages and forgotten rooms, each corner heavy with the ghosts of performances past. Hercule Poirot moved through this labyrinth with purposeful steps, his cane tapping softly against the worn wooden floors as he sought to uncover the secrets buried in Elise Duval's history. The confrontation in the auditorium had left the suspects rattled, their accusations and denials ringing in his ears. But Poirot knew the key to the murder lay not just in the present tensions, but in the echoes of Elise's earlier life. The burned letters hint of blackmail, the torn photograph, and the whispers of her scandalous past pointed to a motive rooted in something older, deeper, a secret someone had killed to keep hidden. Poirot began his investigation in the theatre's archive room, a dusty chamber filled with yellowed programs and faded photographs. He sifted through records of Elise's career, piecing together her journey from a street singer in Montmartre to the opera's brightest star. A brittle newspaper clipping caught his eye, dated 10 years prior, describing a young Elise caught in a scandal, an affair with a married aristocrat, Monsieur Philippe Dubois, whose family had hushed it up to avoid disgrace. The article hinted at a child born in secret, sent away to a convent, a detail Elise had fiercely guarded. Could this be the secret the blackmailer threatened to expose? Poirot's fingers paused on the clipping, his mind racing. If Elise's child was now grown, or if the Dubois family had learned of her return to prominence, someone might have wanted her silence to protect their reputation. His next stop was Elise's dressing room, still sealed by Giraud's police tape. Slipping inside, Poirot examined the space with fresh eyes, his attention drawn to a locked drawer in her vanity. With a delicate twist of a hairpin, Poirot was no stranger to such tricks. He opened it to find a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, signed PD, and spoke of love and regret, dated years ago. One letter, however, was recent, its tone desperate. "You must not speak of it, Elise. The truth would ruin us both." Poirot's grey cells buzzed. Philippe Dubois, perhaps? The aristocrat was long dead, but his family remained influential, and a scandal resurfacing could tarnish their name. Had one of them orchestrated Elise's death? Poirot sought out the stage manager, an elderly man named Claude, who had worked at the opera since Elise's debut. Over a chipped teacup in the break room, Claude shared memories of Elise's early days. She was a firecracker, Monsieur Poirot, but kind. After the scandal, she changed, kept to herself, trusted few. Only Raoul got close, and even he didn't know everything. Claude hesitated, then leaned in. "She got letters, you know, in the last year. Not fan mail, angry ones, left at the stage door. I saw one once, mentioned a promise broken. She burned it, but she looked scared." Poirot nodded, the puzzle pieces shifting. The blackmail wasn't just about money, it was personal, tied to a betrayal from her past. Returning to the suspects, Poirot decided to probe their connections to Elise's history. He found Henri Laurent in the orchestra pit, polishing his baton with a nervous energy. "Monsieur Laurent, did you know of Elise's early life in Montmartre?" Henri's eyes narrowed, but he admitted to hearing rumours of her scandal, dismissing them as gossip. Yet, Poirot learned from a violinist that Henri had once performed at a private salon hosted by the Dubois family years ago. Could he have ties to them, perhaps acting as their agent to silence Elise? The receipt for the dagger sheath, found in Henri's office, suggested premeditation, but his motive remained murky. Victor Beaumont was in his office, surrounded by ledgers, when Poirot confronted him. "Monsieur, your urgent payment, could it have been to a member of the Dubois family to settle a debt tied to Elise's past?" Victor's face paled, but he insisted his payments were for theatre repairs, nothing more. Poirot, however, had found a new clue. A telegram receipt in Victor's trash, addressed to a law firm known to represent the Dubois estate. The message was vague, issue resolved, payment sent, but it raised suspicions. Was Victor brokering a deal to bury Elise's secret, or was he merely caught in their web? Raoul de Vere was pacing the rehearsal room when Poirot approached, holding the torn photograph of Elise. "This word, liar, monsieur. Why did you write it?" Raoul's shoulders sagged, and he confessed to a fight with Elise days before her death. "She told me about her past, the child, but swore she'd never reveal it. I called her a liar because she hid it from me for so long." His voice broke. But Poirot wondered if Raoul's hurt had turned to rage, or if he'd been manipulated by someone else, like the Dubois family, into believing Elise would betray him. Sophie Moreau was rehearsing on a side stage, her voice clear but strained. Poirot showed her the glove with her initials. "Mademoiselle, were you connected to Elise's past, perhaps through the convent where her child was sent?" Sophie's eyes widened, but she denied any knowledge, claiming she was an orphan with no ties to Elise beyond admiration. Yet, a costume assistant whispered to Poirot that Sophie had once mentioned a sister in a convent, a detail she'd quickly retracted. Was Sophie the child Elise had given up, seeking revenge for abandonment, or was she merely a bystander caught in the crossfire? As Poirot left the stage, a sudden flicker of light from the prop room caught his attention. He entered to find a hidden compartment in a set piece, containing a locket with a child's portrait and the initials E.D., Elise Duval. The discovery confirmed the child's existence, but who else knew? The echoes of Elise's past were growing louder, pointing to a motive tied to shame and silence. Poirot tucked the locket away, his resolve firm. The next act would demand a confrontation with the Dubois family's legacy, as the truth behind Elise's murder drew ever closer to the spotlight. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Secrets. The moon hung low over Paris, its pale light seeping through the Opéra Garnier's arched windows, casting a ghostly glow on the marble floors. Hercule Poirot stood in the theatre's grand foyer, his eyes fixed on a portrait of a younger Elise Duval, her smile radiant yet tinged with a hidden sorrow. The locket he'd found, with its child's portrait and Elise's initials, burned in his pocket like a silent accusation. The trail of her past led beyond the opera house, to the powerful Dubois family, whose name carried weight in Parisian high society. Tonight, Poirot would pursue this legacy of secrets, determined to uncover how Elise's long-buried scandal had sparked a murder that now threatened to unravel the lives of everyone involved. Poirot began by seeking out Madame Céleste Dubois, the matriarch of the Dubois family, whose late husband, Philippe, had been Elise's lover years ago. He found her in a lavish townhouse across the Seine, its drawing room adorned with chandeliers and stern family portraits. Madame Dubois, a woman of icy elegance, greeted Poirot with a guarded smile, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, why do you disturb an old woman with tales of a dead singer?" she asked, her voice sharp. Poirot, undeterred, mentioned the letters signed P.D. found in Elise's dressing room. "Your husband's words, madame, spoke of a child. Did Elise's refusal to stay silent threaten your family's honor?" Celeste's composure flickered, but she insisted the affair was ancient history, buried with Philippe's death. Yet, Poirot noticed a recent newspaper on her table, open to an article about Elise's latest triumph, a reminder of her enduring fame. Had Celeste feared Elise would reveal the scandal, tarnishing the Dubois legacy? Leaving the townhouse, Poirot's mind turned to the telegram receipt found in Victor Beaumont's office, linked to the Dubois family's law firm. He visited the firm's discreet office in the Marais, where a nervous clerk confirmed a recent payment from Victor to an account tied to Celeste's estate. The clerk, under Poirot's probing gaze, admitted the payment was labelled consulting fees, but his hesitation suggested a cover for something more sinister. Poirot hypothesized that Victor, desperate to save the opera house, might have struck a deal with Celeste to silence Elise, perhaps delivering the blackmail letter to pressure her compliance. But had Victor gone further, wielding the dagger himself? Back at the opera house, Poirot sought out new evidence in the prop room where the locket had been hidden. Rummaging through a crate of old costumes, he discovered a concealed ledger, its pages detailing payments from the theatre to an unnamed recipient, initialed C.D. Céleste Dubois? The amounts were small but regular, spanning months, suggesting a long-term arrangement. Was Victor paying Celeste to keep her family's secret buried, or was she extorting him to ensure Elise's silence? The ledger's final entry, dated the day of the murder, showed a larger sum, marked final. Poirot's grey cells hummed. This could be the payment for Elise's death, but whose hand had orchestrated it? Returning to the suspects, Poirot confronted Raoul de Vere in the theatre's costume loft, where the baritone was sorting through Carmen's wardrobe, his face etched with grief. "Monsieur de Vere, you knew of Elise's child, but did you know the Dubois family's role?" Raoul's hand stilled, clutching a silk shawl. He admitted hearing rumors of Philippe Dubois' affair, but swore Elise never confirmed the child's identity. Poirot pressed, mentioning the torn photograph with liar scrawled on it. Raoul's eyes darkened as he confessed to writing the word in a moment of anger, believing Elise had lied about her past to protect someone else, perhaps the Dubois family. But his shaky alibi during the murder's timeline kept him in Poirot's sights. Had Raoul, hurt by Elise's secrecy, acted to protect her legacy or his own heart? Sophie Moreau was next, found practicing scales in a quiet corner of the rehearsal hall. Poirot showed her the locket, watching her reaction closely. "Mademoiselle, you spoke of a sister in a convent. Could this be Elise's child, or perhaps you?" Sophie's voice trembled as she denied any connection, insisting her comment about a sister was a misunderstanding. Yet, Poirot had learned from a stagehand that Sophie had visited a convent outside Paris weeks ago, claiming it was for charity. Was she searching for Elise's child, or was she the child herself, driven by resentment? Her access to the prop room, where the dagger and locket were found, made her a compelling suspect, but her youth and inexperience suggested she might be a pawn in a larger scheme. Henri Laurent, the conductor, was in his office when Poirot arrived, the air thick with cigar smoke. Poirot confronted him about his ties to the Dubois family, mentioning the salon performance years ago. Henri admitted to knowing Celeste socially, but denied any recent contact. Yet, the receipt for the dagger sheath found in his office pointed to premeditation. "A gift, you said, monsieur, but for whom?" Poirot asked. Henri's silence was telling, and a new clue emerged. A stagehand recalled seeing Henri near the stage door the night of the murder, speaking to a woman in a hooded cloak, possibly Celeste or an agent. Was Henri her accomplice, using his position to facilitate the crime? As Poirot pieced together these threads, a sudden crash echoed from the theatre's attic, where old set pieces were stored. He climbed the narrow stairs to find a toppled crate, spilling faded letters and a single photograph of Elise with a young girl, her features strikingly similar to Sophie's. The discovery electrified Poirot. Could Sophie be Elise's daughter, or was this another misdirection? The Dubois family's shadow loomed large, their legacy a motive that tied the suspects together. With the night growing darker, Poirot knew the next act would require a daring trap to catch the killer, using their own secrets against them. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The opera. Garnier's stage stood silent under the ghostly flicker of work lights, its vast emptiness a stark contrast to the bustling performances it usually hosted. Hercule Poirot paced the boards, his mind a symphony of clues and contradictions. The photograph of Elise with a young girl, possibly Sophie, clenched in his gloved hand. The Dubois family's legacy, the hidden ledger, and the tangled motives of the suspects pointed to a conspiracy, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach. Poirot knew that to unmask the murderer, he must stage a performance of his own, a trap designed to lure the guilty into revealing themselves. Tonight, the theatre would become a chessboard, and Poirot, the master player, would move the pieces with precision. Poirot devised a plan to gather the suspects: Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere, and Sophie Moreau. Under the pretense of a police reconstruction of the murder, he enlisted Inspector Giraud, who, though sceptical of Poirot's theatrics, agreed to play along. The setting was the stage itself, transformed to resemble Elise's dressing room, with a mannequin dressed in her crimson gown placed where her body was found. Poirot instructed the stagehands to dim the lights, leaving only a single spotlight to heighten the tension. "Mes amis," he announced, as the suspects filed in, their faces pale in the stark light. "Tonight, we recreate the moment of Madame Duval's death. One of you knows the truth. Let us see who flinches." He began by addressing Henri, the conductor, whose nervous energy was palpable. Poirot held up the receipt for the dagger sheath. its damning connection to the murder weapon undeniable. Monsieur Laurent, you were seen near the stage door, speaking to a cloaked woman. Was she your accomplice, perhaps sent by Madame Dubois to ensure Elise's silence? Henry's jaw tightened, but he insisted the receipt was for a colleague's gift, and the woman was a cigarette vendor. Poirot noted his quick glance at Victor, a silent plea or accusation. To test Henri further, Poirot had a stagehand drop a prop dagger nearby, its clatter echoing. Henry flinched, his hand darting to his pocket. A nervous habit, or was he checking for something incriminating? Victor Beaumont sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the mannequin. Poirot turned to him, producing the coded telegram linked to the Dubois family's law firm. Monsieur, your payments to Celeste Dubois suggest a deal to protect her family's name. Did you deliver the dagger to her agent or wield it yourself? Victor's cigarette fell from his fingers, his voice hoarse as he denied any role in the murder, claiming the telegram was about theatre funding. Poirot, however, orchestrated a subtle test. He had Giraud mention a fictional witness who saw Victor near Elise's dressing room during the fatal moment. Victor's face drained of colour, and he stammered a weak alibi about checking props, betraying his unease. Raoul de Vere, the baritone, stood with clenched fists, his grief now laced with defiance. Poirot held up the photograph with liar scrawled on it, then revealed the new find, the image of Elise with a young girl. Monsieur de Vere, was your anger at Elise's secrecy enough to drive you to murder, or did someone manipulate your pain? Raoul's eyes welled, but he swore he only argued with Elise about her past, never harming her. To push him, Poirot staged a moment. A stagehand, hidden in the wings, let out a muffled cry, mimicking Elise's final scream. Raoul spun toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for his side, as if expecting a weapon. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Had Raoul acted on impulse before? Sophie Moreau, the understudy, stood poised but wary, her gaze flickering to the mannequin. Poirot showed her the locket and the photograph, pressing the question of her possible connection to Elise. Mademoiselle, are you the child Elise gave up, seeking revenge for a lost mother? Sophie's composure cracked, her voice sharp as she denied any familial tie, insisting she admired Elise. Poirot tested her further, having Giraud produce a fake letter claiming it was found in the prop room, addressed to Sophie, and hinting at a plot against Elise. Sophie's hands trembled, but she called it a forgery, her eyes darting to Henri, a fleeting look that Poirot caught. As the reconstruction unfolded, Poirot orchestrated a climactic moment. He had the stagehands recreate the thud heard during the performance, using a heavy prop dropped backstage. The sound reverberated, and all four suspects reacted. Henri's head snapped up, Victor froze, Raoul stepped forward, and Sophie gasped softly. Poirot watched their faces, searching for the telltale sign of guilt. Then he revealed a final clue. A stagehand had found a hidden key in the prop room, fitting the lock on Elise's dressing room door. This key, Poirot said, was not with the prop master. Someone took it to enter her room unnoticed. He paused, letting the implication hang. Victor's eyes widened and Sophie's breath hitched, but no one spoke. The tension broke when a sudden noise, a creak from the catwalk above, drew everyone's attention. Poirot signaled Giraud, who sent officers to investigate, but they found only a loosened rope, perhaps tampered with to distract. Poirot's trap had stirred the pot, revealing cracks in each suspect's facade. But the killer remained elusive. He dismissed the group, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, knowing the pressure would force a mistake. As the suspects dispersed, Poirot lingered on the stage, his mind racing. The key, the photograph, the reactions, all pointed to a truth just out of reach. The next act would demand a deeper probe into the Dubois family's role, as the killer's final move loomed closer. Chapter 8. The Dubois Connection, the Opera. Garnier stood like a silent sentinel under the Parisian dawn, its golden statues glinting faintly as the first rays of sunlight pierced the morning mist. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the sleepless night, stood in the theatre's costume loft, surrounded by racks of sequined gowns and feathered masks, his mind fixated on the Dubois family's shadow over Elise Duval's murder. The key found in the prop room, the photograph of Elise with a young girl, and the coded telegram tied to Celeste Dubois wove a complex tapestry of motive and opportunity. The trap he'd set on the stage had rattled the suspects. Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere, and Sophie Moreau, but their reactions only deepened the mystery. Now Poirot turned his attention to the Dubois family's influence, determined to unearth how their legacy of power and shame had orchestrated a deadly finale. Poirot began his day by returning to Madame Celeste Dubois' townhouse, armed with new questions. The matriarch received him in her study, a room lined with leather-bound books and a portrait of her late husband, Philippe, whose affair with Elise had sparked the scandal years ago. Poirot's eyes locked onto hers as he produced the telegram receipt linking her law firm to Victor's payment. "Madame, this suggests your family paid to silence Elise. Was her knowledge of your husband's child a threat you could not abide?" Celeste's lips tightened, her fingers gripping a pearl necklace. She admitted to knowing of Elise's past, but insisted the payment was for a charitable donation to the opera, not a sinister plot. Yet Poirot noticed a locked desk drawer, its key dangling from her chatelaine. With a polite distraction, a compliment on her roses, he deftly palmed the key, later returning to open the drawer. Inside, he found a letter from Elise dated weeks ago, pleading for the child's safety and refusing further payments. The letter's tone was defiant, suggesting Elise had grown bold, perhaps too bold for the Dubois family's liking. Back at the opera house, Poirot sought to connect this revelation to the suspects. He found Victor Beaumont in the manager's office, poring over ledgers with a haggard expression. Poirot confronted him with the ledger's CD entries and the telegram. "Monsieur, were you a go-between for Celeste Dubois, delivering threats to Elise to protect your theatre?" Victor's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the same brand as the butt found in the basement. He admitted to negotiating with Celeste's lawyer to secure funding, but swore he never threatened Elise. Poirot, however, uncovered a new clue, a crumpled note in Victor's wastebin, written in Celeste's elegant hand, instructing him to handle the problem before the gala. The gala was the night of Elise's murder, and Victor's evasive glance confirmed he was hiding more than financial woes. Next, Poirot tracked down Henri Laurent, who was rehearsing the orchestra in the pit, his baton slashing the air with forced vigour. Poirot produced the dagger sheath receipt and the testimony of his meeting with a cloaked woman. "Monsieur Laurent, was this woman Celeste Dubois hiring you to eliminate Elise?" Henri's face flushed, but he claimed the woman was a music critic seeking an interview. Poirot's skepticism grew when a cellist whispered that Henri had boasted about a lucrative side job days before the murder, hinting at a connection to a wealthy patron. Digging deeper, Poirot examined Henri's scorebook, finding a hidden note tucked inside, written in code. Payment received. Task complete. The handwriting didn't match Celeste's, but its cryptic nature suggested Henri's role as more than a bystander. Raoul de Vere was in the green room, staring at a poster of Elise as Carmen, his eyes red-rimmed. Poirot showed him the photograph of Elise with the young girl, probing his knowledge of the Dubois family. "Monsieur, did Elise confide in you about threats from Celeste?" Raoul's voice was low as he admitted Elise had mentioned a recent confrontation with someone claiming to represent the Dubois family, demanding she leave Paris. He'd urged her to comply, fearing for her life, but she refused, determined to protect her legacy. Poirot noted Raoul's torn coat sleeve, matching a fabric scrap found near the prop room's hidden compartment. Had Raoul been there, searching for evidence, or planting it to deflect suspicion? His grief seemed genuine, but his shaky alibi kept him in the crosshairs. Sophie Moreau was practicing in a side room, her voice hauntingly similar to Elise's. Poirot presented the locket and the photograph, watching her closely. "Mademoiselle, your convent visit. Were you seeking Elise's child, or are you that child?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she insisted she was an orphan with no ties to Elise, her convent trip a mere charity visit. Yet Poirot had uncovered a new detail. A nun from the convent had sent a letter to the theatre, addressed to Sophie, mentioning a family matter. The letter was missing, but its existence suggested Sophie knew more than she admitted. Her presence near the prop room, where the locket and key were found, hinted at a deeper involvement, perhaps as a manipulated pawn or a vengeful daughter. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the theatre's attic, where the photograph had been found. Searching further, he discovered a hidden trapdoor leading to a narrow crawlspace, containing a small box with a Dubois family crest. Inside was a single earring, matching one Elise wore the night she died, and a note in Celeste's handwriting. "Keep her quiet, or we all fall." The note was undated, but its urgency pointed to a desperate plan. Had Celeste enlisted one of the suspects to act, or was she working through an intermediary? The crawlspace's dust bore fresh footprints, too large for Sophie's, suggesting a man, Henri, Victor, or Raoul, had been there recently. Poirot's trap had stirred the suspects, and now the Dubois connection tightened the noose. Celeste's letter, Victor's note, Henri's coded message, Raoul's torn sleeve, and Sophie's convent link formed a web of deceit. But the killer's hand remained hidden. As Poirot descended from the attic, a shadow moved in the wings, a fleeting figure that vanished before he could follow. The theatre seemed to pulse with secrets, and Poirot knew the next act would require a final confrontation, where the Dubois family's legacy would face the spotlight, and the murderer would have nowhere left to hide. Chapter 9. The Final Rehearsal. The Opera Garnier's auditorium was cloaked in an eerie hush, the velvet seats absorbing the faint echoes of footsteps as Hercule Poirot prepared for his most daring move yet. The clues, the Dubois family's note, the hidden earring, the coded messages, and the tangled ties of the suspects had woven a complex web, but the killer's identity remained a shadow just beyond the spotlight. The air thrummed with tension, as if the theatre itself sensed the climax approaching. Poirot, standing in the centre of the stage, had decided to stage a final rehearsal, not of music or drama, but of truth. He would bring the suspects together once more, using the weight of their secrets and the Dubois connection to force the murderer into the open. Poirot summoned Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere, and Sophie Moreau to the stage, arranging them in a tight circle under the glow of a single chandelier, its crystals casting fractured light across their anxious faces. Inspector Giraud stood in the wings, his officers discreetly positioned at the exits, ready for any sudden moves. Poirot's voice was calm but commanding, cutting through the silence like a conductor's baton. "Mes amis, the time for pretense is over. Elise Duval's murder was no act of passion, but a calculated strike, tied to the Dubois family's shame. Tonight, the curtain falls on the guilty." The suspects exchanged wary glances, their breaths shallow as Poirot began to unravel the final threads. He started with Henri, the conductor, whose arrogance had crumbled into nervous twitches. Poirot held up the coded note from Henri's scorebook. Its words, "Payment received, task complete," glaring in the dim light. "Monsieur Laurent, this suggests you were paid to act against Elise, perhaps by Celeste Dubois. Did you slip into her dressing room using the stolen key?" Henri's face reddened, and he shouted that the note referred to a music commission, not murder. But Poirot revealed a new discovery. A stagehand had seen Henri in the prop room hours before the murder, handling the dagger's case, not just its sheath. Henri's hands shook as he insisted it was for inventory, but his faltering voice betrayed him. Poirot noted his quick glance at Sophie, a flicker of shared fear. Turning to Victor Beaumont, Poirot produced the note from Celeste, found in Victor's waste bin, urging him to handle the problem. Monsieur, your ties to the Dubois family are clear. Payments, telegrams, and secret meetings. Did you wield the dagger to save your theatre or to protect Celeste's honor? Victor's cigarette dropped, his voice hoarse as he claimed the note was about funding negotiations. But Poirot had uncovered a damning detail. A doorman recalled Victor lingering near Elise's dressing room during the performance, his coat dusted with the same face powder found at the crime scene. Victor stammered, insisting he was checking on props, but his eyes darted to Raoul, as if seeking an ally or fearing betrayal. Raoul de Vere stood rigid, his grief now a mask for something darker. Poirot held up the earring from the crawl space, matching Elise's, and the torn sleeve scrap found near the prop room. Monsieur, your anger at Elise's secrecy, calling her a liar, was it enough to kill? Were you in that crawl space hiding evidence? Raoul's voice cracked as he admitted to confronting Elise about her past, but he swore he left her alive. Poirot pressed further, revealing a witness, a chorus girl, who saw Raoul slip into the backstage corridor just before the fatal thud, his hands gloved. Raoul's face paled, and he muttered about checking on Elise's safety, but his torn sleeve suggested a struggle. His glance at Sophie was sharp, almost accusatory, hinting at a deeper connection. Sophie Moreau, the understudy, met Poirot's gaze with a mix of defiance and fear. He showed her the photograph of Elise with a young girl, and the nun's letter about a family matter. Mademoiselle, are you Elise's daughter, driven by abandonment to murder? Sophie's lips trembled, and she denied being the child, claiming the photograph was a keepsake from Elise's mentorship. But Poirot had found a new clue. A diary in Sophie's dressing room, its pages detailing her resentment toward Elise for stealing her chance at stardom. A passage mentioned a meeting with a wealthy patron who promised to clear the path. Was this Celeste Dubois, or another suspect manipulating Sophie? Her nervous fidgeting, clutching her gloves, suggested she was hiding something critical. Poirot orchestrated the climax, directing the stagehands to reenact the murder's moment. The thud, the dimmed lights, and a recorded scream echoing through the theatre. As the sound rang out, he watched the suspects closely. Henri clutched his baton, Victor's cigarette fell again, Raoul stepped back, and Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Then, Poirot revealed the hidden key's significance. Its unique design matched a lock only accessible from the backstage catwalk, a path requiring agility and knowledge of the theatre's secrets. The killer used this to enter and exit unseen, he said, and only one of you was seen on the catwalk that night. A sudden movement broke the tension. A stagehand, stationed above, shouted that a figure was fleeing across the catwalk. Giraud's officers gave chase, but the figure vanished into the theatre's maze. Poirot, undeterred, produced a final clue, a second earring, found in the catwalk's rigging, bearing the Dubois crest. This links the crime directly to Celeste Dubois, he declared. But who was her instrument? The suspects froze, their masks slipping as accusations flew. Henri pointed at Victor, claiming he saw him on the catwalk. Victor accused Raoul of acting out of jealousy. Raoul shouted that Sophie's ambition drove her, and Sophie whispered that Henri had coerced her into silence. As the chaos subsided, Poirot stepped forward, his voice steady. The truth is near, mes amis. The Dubois legacy fueled this crime, but the hand that struck was one of yours. He dismissed them, knowing the fleeing figure had left a trail. In the wings, he found a dropped handkerchief, monogrammed with CD, Celeste Dubois, but scented with a perfume Sophie wore. The final act was approaching, and Poirot sensed the killer's desperation would lead to their undoing. The next chapter would unveil the murderer's face as the theatre's secrets took center stage. Chapter 10. The curtain falls. The Opera Garnier's grand stage was bathed in a ghostly glow, the flickering worklights casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with the weight of the truth about to be unveiled. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the proscenium, his silhouette sharp against the crimson curtain, the monogrammed handkerchief with Sophie's perfume, and Celeste Dubois' initials clutched in his hand. The fleeing figure on the catwalk, the earrings, the diary, and the web of motives tied to the Dubois family had brought him to this moment. The suspects, Henri Laurent, Victor Beaumont, Raoul de Vere, and Sophie Moreau, were gathered once more, their faces taut with dread as Poirot prepared to reveal the killer. The theatre held its breath. The final act, poised to expose the murderer who had orchestrated Elise Duval's deadly finale. Poirot began with a slow, deliberate pace, his voice resonating through the auditorium. Mes amis, the murder of Madame Elise Duval was a symphony of deceit, composed by one among you, with the Dubois family's shadow as its muse. But the truth, it always emerges. He held up the handkerchief, its scent unmistakable. This, found after last night's chase, links two worlds, Sophie's ambition and Celeste Dubois' desperation. The suspects froze, their eyes locked on Poirot as he wove the clues together. The key to the dressing room, the coded notes, the earrings, and the photograph of Elise with a young girl formed a mosaic of betrayal. But one piece stood out, the killer's motive, rooted in both personal gain and a need to protect a legacy. He turned first to Sophie Moreau, whose poised exterior had crumbled into nervous glances. Mademoiselle, your diary revealed your resentment toward Elise, your belief she stole your chance at stardom. But there is more. You are her daughter, abandoned to a convent, are you not? Sophie's gasp echoed, her hands clutching her dress. She denied it, her voice trembling. But Poirot produced the nun's letter, now recovered from a hidden drawer in the prop room, confirming Sophie's identity as Elise's child. You sought revenge, Poirot said, and Celeste Dubois, aware of your existence, used you. The handkerchief, scented with your perfume but bearing her initials, shows you met her. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she insisted she only wanted Elise's approval, not her death. Yet her presence on the catwalk, confirmed by a stagehand's testimony, placed her near the crime scene. Next, Poirot faced Henri Laurent, the conductor, whose coded note and dagger sheath receipt pointed to complicity. Monsieur, you were Celeste's agent, paid to ensure Elise's silence. Your meeting with a cloaked woman, Madame Dubois herself, sealed your role. Henri's face twisted, and he admitted to accepting money from Celeste to pressure Elise. But he swore he never touched the dagger. Poirot revealed a new clue. A stagehand had found Henri's cigar ash near the catwalk's trapdoor, suggesting he'd been there during the murder's timeline. Henri's voice rose in panic, accusing Victor of framing him. But Poirot's steady gaze silenced him. The conductor's greed had made him a pawn, but was he the killer? Victor Beaumont, pale and sweating, was next. Poirot held up the note from Celeste, urging him to handle the problem. Monsieur, your debts to the Dubois family's lenders drove you to act. You delivered the blackmail letter, but did you also wield the dagger? Victor's hands shook as he admitted to passing messages for Celeste, hoping to save the theatre, but he denied murder. Poirot countered with evidence. The face powder on Victor's coat matched Elise's dressing room, and a janitor saw him slip into the backstage corridor just before the fatal thud. Victor's denials grew frantic, his eyes darting to Raoul, as if seeking rescue or casting blame. Raoul de Vere, the baritone, stood with clenched fists, his grief now a mask for desperation. Poirot showed the torn photograph and the fabric scrap from his sleeve. Monsieur, your love for Elise turned to rage when you learned of her secrets. Did you confront her, only to strike in anger? Raoul's voice broke as he admitted to arguing with Elise about her past, but he swore he left her alive. Poirot revealed a final clue. A prop master found Raoul's glove, stained with red stage makeup, near the dressing room's window. A possible misdirection, but damning. Raoul's eyes locked on Sophie, and he whispered, "She knew everything," hinting at a shared secret. Poirot stepped back, his voice rising. The killer stood on the catwalk, used the key to enter Elise's dressing room, and struck with the dagger. But the motive was twofold: Celeste Dubois' fear of scandal and a personal betrayal. He turned to Sophie, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle, you were manipulated by Celeste, who promised you stardom if you silenced your mother. But it was you who climbed the catwalk, you who took the dagger, and you who struck." Driven by years of resentment, Sophie collapsed, sobbing, confessing she'd met Celeste, who revealed her parentage and offered her Elise's role. Overwhelmed by betrayal, Sophie had acted, using the key Celeste provided. Giraud's officers moved to arrest Sophie, but Poirot raised a hand. "Celeste Dubois orchestrated this, and she will face justice." He had already sent evidence to the police, linking Celeste's payments and notes to the crime. As Sophie was led away, the suspects dispersed, their secrets laid bare. Poirot stood alone on the stage, the curtain falling behind him. "The truth, mes amis, is the final note of this tragedy." To the audience, he added, "If this tale of mystery has captivated you, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us." The theatre darkened, the case closed, but the echoes of Elise's voice lingered in the silence.